Welcome to Love Your Life After Divorce, the podcast where you'll learn everything you need to know to rebuild your life after divorce from the inside out. Let's dive in. Hey, friend, how are you? I am a little bit under the weather, so I apologize if my voice is nasally and a little sick sounding, but it is what it is. I'm wondering if you have ever had this experience where you hear the same message in multiple settings from multiple people. Maybe it's varied, but you're basically getting the same message in multiple places. Well, that's what happened to me last week. I heard a very similar message in very different places, and I was like, okay, universe, I hear you. I know you're trying to get me to see this or understand this or take this in. And so I definitely felt called to also share it with you because it really just struck me as super valuable for people going through divorce and recovering after divorce. And so the general idea of what I was hearing in these messages is, what if your greatest growth and your biggest awakening are just on the other side of the darkest, most difficult part of your life? What if going through something incredibly hard opens you up to new possibilities and helps you create something amazing? And as you know, that is totally what I believe about divorce, that it is such an opportunity for us to create lives we love, for us to become better versions of ourselves. And so I was super excited when I realized I was hearing this message in different places and in different ways. And so I want to share with you each of the ways I heard this last week, and then just kind of expand on it and give you some really practical ways to make it through this hard time and get to that other side where you are much more free and expanded and happy and joyful. So, the first message that I heard was when I was listening to a recent Mel Robbins podcast. Most of you probably have heard of Mel Robbins because her podcast is the number one podcast out there. And she interviews lots of people, has such good content of just, you know, self improvement, basically. And so this episode was called How to Find Your Purpose and Design the Life You Want, which is so in line with exactly what I love helping my clients with. In this episode, she interviewed Martha Beck, who is one of the most well known life coaches in the world. She has written numerous best selling books. She's a public speaker. She just has so much wisdom. And so listening to Mel interview Martha was such a treat. And at the beginning of the episode, Mel asked Martha, just tell us a little bit about your background. And she said, I've had the privilege of going through some really difficult things in my life. And when she said that sentence, I was just struck right off the bat. I mean, how many people actually really and truly believe that going through something super difficult is a privilege? Not many people, because it's human nature to want to avoid suffering. None of us enjoy going through something super difficult. And so, right off the bat, you can hear that Martha has such a different perspective. And then, at another time in the episode, Mel asked Martha, what would you say to someone who finds themselves in a life they are just not happy with? And Martha, without skipping a beat, so quickly, Martha said, oh, I would say, congratulations. This is the best thing that could be happening to you. And when she said that, Mel just laughed, and you could tell she was totally caught off guard because she did not expect Martha to say that. And then another thing that Martha talked about in the episode that really struck me, she used the example in nature that I know we've all heard before, but it struck me in a different way this time. She talked about how a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. And you may not know this, but when a caterpillar forms a chrysalis, what they do when they're in there is they literally liquefy. Because if you think about it, you've seen caterpillars, you've seen butterflies. It's not like the body of the caterpillar stays the same and it just sprouts wings. No, I mean, the body of the butterfly is much thinner and looks totally different than the caterpillar. And so the whole entire caterpillar literally breaks down and liquefies, and then it recreates itself. It totally creates a new form as a butterfly. And I just think this is such a perfect metaphor for divorce because life as we know it ends. We are no longer the same. And when you are in the middle of your divorce, you feel completely broken down. You wonder things like, what in the world is happening? Who am I going to be after this? It's really hard to imagine the future possibilities when you're in the midst of it. When you are in that liquefied, broken down state, it is really hard to imagine that you can come out on the other side beautiful and free. It's hard to imagine that your life can be better than you ever imagined it could be. But it is so true. And before I dive into more about the episode and what Martha shared, I want to tell you the other two places that I heard very similar messages last week. The second place I heard a very similar message was in a sermon at my church. The topic was facing our shadows and how it can be so scary and painful to acknowledge and face those really dark sides of us or the dark sides of our spirituality. And of course, this was from a spiritual lens that he was talking, but it just so beautifully also went along with our journey through divorce because he talked about how when we avoid our shadows, when we avoid the difficulties, when we pretend we're fine when we're not, we feel like we're keeping ourselves safe. But what we're actually doing is we're keeping ourselves stuck. We're keeping ourselves incomplete, inauthentic. We can't experience the fullness of who we really are without facing the shadows or the quote, ugly places. We try to outrun the things that we're afraid of. And this causes us just to miss out on the chance to become grounded and just to really operate as our true selves. And when he talked about this, it rang so true for me personally. I know I've shared here, if you haven't listened to all the episodes, maybe you've missed it, but I've shared a lot about my own experience of being in my marriage and feeling just trapped, feeling not like myself, feeling like I was shrinking, like I was becoming less of who I was. And, having to face that truth, having to be honest about the reality of that situation was a huge, I mean, that's what kind of thrust me into the whole divorce process and recognizing this is not me. This is not authentic. This is not where I want to be. I don't feel like I'm growing. I don't feel like I'm free. So, what my minister was saying in this sermon just really rang true for me of my own experience going through my divorce. Because he said that when you convince yourself that staying with what you know is the right choice because it feels safe, it can actually feel like a slow suffocation of your soul. And that's exactly what happened to me. I felt like I was suffocating. And so the discomfort of facing hard truths is what allows us to move forward and become our true selves. Waking up, facing the truth can lead to true transformation. You can learn so much about who you really are. You can become so much stronger and more authentic. And of course, this takes courage and vulnerability. It's so much easier just to numb ourselves out, to avoid, to be in denial. Oh, I'm totally fine. Everything's fine. We've all been in that space, right? But it's not good for us. It's not an authentic experience. And he also used this little metaphor of setting off on a ship in the ocean. He said, if you're going to experience new horizons, you have to leave the shores of comfort. And setting off on this journey is so scary when all you can see around you is ocean. When you can see no land, when you see no destination, when you don't even know exactly if you're going in the right direction, it is terrifying. And so that little metaphor is, I think, so accurate to divorce. When you're in the midst of it, when you're in that boat being tossed around by the waves, you don't even know which direction you're going. You know, if you fall overboard, you're going to die. You want to believe that there's some beautiful land up ahead, that there's some tropical island that you can really enjoy and feel grounded and stable and safe. But in the midst of it, when you're on that boat, you just don't know. You're just so scared. And you may convince yourself that it is not worth the risk. I see this all the time, and especially in like divorce support groups on Facebook. Women all the time talk about how long they stayed in their marriages because they were so afraid to get out. They were so afraid that they couldn't make it. They were so afraid that life after divorce would be even worse than the hell they were currently living in their marriages. And it's so amazing to see these same women say, "I'm so glad I finally took the leap. I'm so glad I finally trusted myself or believed that I could do it." We all just resist change because it's unknown and we don't like it, right? And the other way that spiritually speaking, this whole idea of like going through the dark night of the soul is what they call it in Christianity. And it allows you to move forward into a new dawn of self awareness. And like I said, I feel like this spiritual analogy of the journey that a lot of people go through in their own faith journeys, it's the same for divorced women. And then the third way that I heard the same exact message was I was reading a friend's post on Facebook, and she was sharing about her home birth that she had. And by the way, it was so beautiful. She had a professional photographer who took pictures, and she really detailed and outlined how the birth unfolded and how the labor went and all that. But one thing she said that really stood out to me, because I also had 4 unmedicated births. I did not do a home birth, but I did use midwives and I had no drugs. And there's this thing that happens, which they told us about in our birth class. And I remember it stuck with me, and I'm glad it did, because there's this thing that happens right before it's time to start actually pushing the baby out, right before you're in that final phase of labor and delivery, when you're almost fully dilated and you're almost done with the most painful part of the labor. That is when you say to yourself, I can't do this anymore. I cannot handle another moment of this incredible pain. I just can't do this. It's too hard. I'm not going to make it. And that's exactly what happened to me every single time. And that's what this woman shared on Facebook as well. And it just reminded me of going through a divorce. When we are in the worst time of it, it's so easy to think, I can't handle this. I cannot make it through. And I want you to know that that signifies that you are close to being done. You are close to the end. And there is something beautiful on the other side. With each of my labors, oh, it was just such a relief to finally have that baby in my arms. It made all that pain worth it. And it was just so fascinating that right at the end is when I thought, I can't do it. I just can't do this anymore. And then before I knew it, the baby was out and I was holding my sweet child, and it was amazing. And so these three very different messages that I heard all had that similar same story or same message, which is sometimes when you are in the hardest, darkest place, that means you're so close to something beautiful on the other side. So let's get really specific. Let's talk about, what do you do when you're in this place? How do you proceed? How do you face it? How do you get through it? In the podcast episode, in Mel Robbins' episode, Martha actually takes Mel through a very specific exercise, which amazingly is very similar to what I do with my own clients. And so I'm just going to kind of meld them together and describe this very specific exercise that you can either take yourself through or you can do with a life coach. So the first thing you do is you think about, what is it right now in your life that you are not happy with, that you are really struggling with? What is that thing that is just really hard right now? So just think about that thing. And then I want you to identify what feeling comes up for you when you think about that situation, when you think about that specific struggle, that really difficult time. How do you feel? And once you acknowledge that feeling, a lot of times it's something like fear or anger or grief or sadness. So once you can identify it, the next step is to ask yourself, where is this in my body? Where is this showing up? Where do I feel it right now? You have to kind of close your eyes, drop into your body, and just pay attention and ask yourself, where is this emotion right now showing up in my body? When Martha did this with Mel, Mel felt a very heavy plate in the middle of her chest, and that was fear for her. And so, after you've identified where it is, the next step is just to feel it. Let it be there. Don't judge it. Don't try to get rid of it. Just let it be there. If you are a creative type thinker, at this little phase of this exercise, you can examine and describe your feeling in whatever amount of detail you want. I think it's super fun and helpful to think about things like, what color is this emotion? Does it have a texture? How heavy is it? Is it moving? Just really get creative and describe it. But if that feels weird to you, you don't have to do that part. The important part is to just identify where it is in your body and just to let it be there. And so after you've done that, the next thing to ask yourself is, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What does this fear want to say right now? And when Martha asked Mel this question, she said that the fear wanted to tell her, you're about to do something stupid. And then Martha offered something that I thought was so brilliant and so helpful. She said, what's actually true is the opposite of that. Suffering always tells you the opposite of what you really need to know. And so the opposite of the most painful thought in your head is actually the pathway to reawakening. And so in this example with Mel Robbins, right there on her podcast, Martha said, actually, the truth is you're about to do something brilliant. And it was so cool in that moment for Mel to be like, oh, like she just felt the truth of that statement. And it was so powerful to her and such a relief. And, I hear the same common questions that a lot of divorced women have that come from so much fear. They ask themselves things like, am I going to be able to make it on my own? Am I ever going to be loved again? Am I going to be alone forever? Those are such typical questions. And one little piece of advice is, if you're asking yourself a question like that, always turn it into a statement, because that's the truth of what you're thinking. When you're thinking, am I ever going to be able to make it on my own? What you're saying to yourself is, I'm not going to be able to make it on my own. I'm never going to be loved again. I'll be alone forever. Those are your thoughts, right? And so once you've identified those thoughts, remember to turn it around and look for the opposite. Even if you don't believe it at all, I want you to try this. So if you identify a thought, what your fear is telling you right now, if your fear is telling you you're going to be alone forever, I want you to say to yourself, I'm never going to be alone. How does it feel when you say that? Even if it doesn't feel true, when you can say the opposite thought to yourself, it opens up that little space in your brain. You are basically challenging that thought. You're saying, hey, what if actually the opposite is true? And another little trick that I love to use with my clients and with myself is, if there's a thought that you want to believe, but that you really and truly just don't, just put the phrase, it's possible that, in front of it. So it's possible that I can totally make it on my own. It's possible that I will find love again. It's possible that I will never be alone. And so when you just put that phrase that it's possible, it allows you, like I said, to just open up your mind enough to imagine the possibility, to imagine that maybe it could be true. And that gives you some relief. And it also just allows you to go in that direction. And so how do we know how to proceed? How do we know what to do next? When you feel stuck, when you feel confused, when you don't see a way ahead, when you have no hope for the future, what do? What Martha Beck recommended on the podcast is to follow joy, follow lightness, follow freedom and expansion. Anything that makes you feel joy, light, free, expansive, this is the direction you want to go. It's like when you're tracking a wild animal and you're looking at the paw prints on the ground. You know what direction to go because you see the paw prints leading you. That's exactly what you do with those emotions. Like I said, when you feel joy, yes, that's the direction you want to go. Whatever makes you feel free and alive and excited and expansive, you know you're going in the right direction if you follow those emotions. And on the flip side, the opposite, if you feel trapped, if you feel smaller, if you feel like you're shrinking down, then that is not your path. And that's how I felt in my marriage. And that's how I knew I couldn't stay there. I got to the point where I felt like I was just going to be crammed into a tiny box and I could not tolerate it anymore. I had to get out. Another really interesting thing that Martha shared on the podcast that I think can really help you all is to focus on where you want to go. She gave the analogy of when you're riding a horse, you are looking at where you want to go, and that's where the horse will go. And if you are, say, a whitewater rafting guide and you're trying to manage your way down these rapids, you look at the water. You look at the little pathways where your boat can go. You don't look at the rocks themselves. And another analogy that's exactly the same message is a hockey player. A hockey player looks at the spaces in the goal. A hockey goal is not very big, and the goalie is standing right there in front of it, right? So there are very few spaces that the puck can actually get through. But hockey players say that you should look at the spaces. If you look at the goalie, you're going to hit that puck straight to the goalie. And so the message in these three different analogies or metaphors is to don't look at all the obstacles. Don't look at all your limiting, painful thoughts. If you're constantly thinking things like, I am stuck, this is horrible, I don't know what to do, I'm totally on my own, no one will ever love me again, my life is always going to be horrible from now until I die. If you're thinking thoughts like that, that is what you're focused on. But if you look for the opposite thoughts, then you'll start going in that direction. If you think things like, I'll figure this out, there definitely is a way forward. This is hard, but I'll make it through this. I don't know exactly what to do, but I'm going to figure it out. I'm not all on my own. I have friends, I have family, I have my kids, I have my church, I have my pickleball group or my book club. When you start looking at the positives that will allow you to move forward, then you will move forward. So just pay attention to that. What are you focused on? Are you focused on the obstacles? Are you focused on the things that are standing in your way, the ways that you don't see a path forward? Or are you looking for the little glimpses, the openness, the path forward? So I want to go back to the caterpillar and butterfly metaphor because if you think about it, when a caterpillar knows that it's time for it to change, what does it do? It constructs a chrysalis so that it will be safe while it's broken down and totally helpless. Can you imagine if there was no chrysalis and caterpillars just liquefied right there on the tree branch or whatever? I mean, I don't think they would make it. I don't think they would turn into butterflies, right? They have to have the chrysalis to protect them, to have a container to hold basically their bodies while they liquefy and then rebuild themselves into butterflies. And when I think about this in relation to divorce, I think that this idea is what makes divorce so hard. I mean, hardly anyone prepares really well for divorce. Most of us are just hit like a ton of bricks and the rug's pulled out from under us and all of a sudden we're becoming liquid and we don't know what to do. We don't feel safe, we don't feel stable, we don't have safety. And, we're just thrust into it and we find ourselves broken down and liquefied without much warning or any chance to prepare. So, what you can do in that moment is you can build your chrysalis, you can build your support system as you're going through the divorce and even after. You can find those supportive friends who are always going to be there for you, who are going to encourage you, who are going to remind you of who you are and what you're capable of. Look for those family members that will stick by you. Find a support group, either virtually or in person. Hire a life coach, work with a therapist, practice self care. Find those activities that allow you to take care of yourself and give yourself compassion. Find a community like a church or a workout class or a pickleball group or a book club. So, creating the safety, just like that chrysalis, creating your own safety and support as you go through the change is so important. And while you're in the midst of the loss, as you are broken down and liquefied, just like that caterpillar, that's just a normal part of the process. It's you can't really avoid that, right? That's the whole point of the messages that I heard in these multiple places is going through these really challenging times is what allows you to grow. It's what allows you to change. It's what allows you to become a new version of yourself. But while you're in that state of being broken down, I want to offer that I think your main task, your main goal in that stage is to grieve the loss. Grieve the loss of your ex, grieve the loss of the life you had, grieve the loss of your kids, whatever you need to grieve. When you do that, you can truly heal, but you have to feel it to heal it. Once you really grieve the losses, and come to acceptance that this is what has happened, that now you are going to create a new life. When you grieve and you accept, then that is when you're ready to emerge as your new version of yourself, just like that butterfly. That's when you're ready to create the life that you love. So just remember that no feeling is permanent. No feeling is final. You have to embrace those really painful emotions in order to move past them. And when you embrace the full spectrum of your humanity, when you acknowledge that the difficult moments, the dark moments, the really desperate and horrible moments are just part of being human, and they are the pathway to growth. They are the vehicle that's going to get you to becoming an even better, more authentic, more alive, more real version of yourself, then you'll be able to face it. I mean, to be fully alive, you have to allow certain things to die. To be in the light, you have to walk through the darkness. So, what if divorce really is your greatest pathway to a more abundant, fulfilling life? What if you have to be totally broken down and liquefied before you can rebuild and emerge as beautiful and free? I really think that this is true. And when you can start to believe that this is your path, that this is the way you are going to love your life, then you will approach it so much differently. You will have such a different perspective. You'll be like Martha Beck, who says, "What a privilege it was to go through such a difficult time." So I just encourage you to look for the truth in that this week. When you find yourself thinking those really painful thoughts, challenge yourself to believe the opposite. Say the opposite thought to yourself, and then just follow your joy. Follow what makes you feel alive and free. When you feel like you are expanding, when you are growing, that is the path you want to be taking. You've got this. I'm here with you. And if there's anything I can do to help support you on this journey, feel free to reach out. Have a great week.
If you're feeling lost, overwhelmed, or unsure of how to move forward after your divorce, I've created a free guide just for you. It's called the 5 Stages of Divorce Recovery, and it lays out the roadmap to help you heal, rebuild, and love your life after divorce. This guide is packed with insights and actionable steps that will take you from grieving to embracing your future with confidence. Click the link in this podcast description, and the free guide will be delivered straight to your inbox.